Thank you, Chairman, for holding this hearing today, and I want to welcome Ambassador Lighthizer. And Ambassador, thank you for your leadership in the trade space. You have made us proud in terms of your representation in the trade agreements, USMCA, the Phase 1 deal with China, and obviously the deal with Japan, and what you've talked about with future trade agreements. And your focus on reciprocal and fair trade and a pro-growth agenda is I think will reap benefits for the United States. So I want to thank you for that. I wanted to ask a couple questions related to China. And the first one is, it's been mentioned today about the obligations and responsibilities that China has between now and the end of the year on purchase agreements. I'm wondering if you could give an update specifically on ag purchases, roughly $50 to $60 billion that China is obligated to come through on contractually between now and the end of the year. If you could give us an update on that. I know they've bought a significant amount of sorghum and cotton. I'd be interested on where they're at on soybeans and corn and ethanol. You could comment on that. Secondarily, as you may be aware, the Republican leadership has put forth a China task force. I've been appointed to that by Leader McCarthy, and we are working diligently on coming up with a comprehensive report. And I think you're addressing the group at the end of the month. My specific question would be related. There's a lot of talk in Congress about decoupling, about moving back supply chains, particularly with the vulnerabilities that we saw during Corona as related to pharmaceuticals and generic drugs and other medicines. I'm wondering whether you could comment on the administration's position as it relates to moving those supply chains back. To me, these are complicated, intricate, and nuanced supply chains with China. And if we are going to do that, it seems like there's a significant cost associated with that. And if you could comment on how do we pay for that? Is that done through tax incentives or tax credit, or is it actual money that has to be put forth by the government to implement bringing back some of those supply chains or decoupling? Thank you, Mr. Ambassador.
Great, thank you, Congressman. So first of all, on the question of agriculture purchases, and you mentioned specifically oilseeds, China has undertaken a very large commitment of oilseeds. To give you some of these numbers are confidential, but to give you a frame of reference, the most we ever sold by far to China was $12 billion, over $12 billion in 2017. Now, once again, I've got to say there's a difference between our export numbers and their import numbers, so these numbers are never quite as precise as we would like just because of the nature of trade statistics. But they have undertaken to buy substantially more than that. At this stage, more or less to date, they are at about they're over $3 billion. So, we feel good that they will be on. If you think of oilseeds, one way to think about it is that early, and I know you know this is your area, but I'll just answer it. Early in the year, basically oilseeds around the world are bought from Brazil because that's when their planting season is. Later in the year, it's from the United States because that's when our planting season is. Right now, we're getting into when you expect a lot of seeds to be bought. If you look at 2017, where I gave that big number, close to $10 billion of that was towards the end of the year. So we're starting to see a lot of major purchases. We feel very good about it. For example, last week and in recent weeks, the vast majority of the purchases have been from the United States, even though it's a little early for our season. And last week it was $500 million of soybeans. And I focus on a little bit because soybeans more because that's such an important market for American companies. This issue of decoupling is a complicated one. Do I think supply chains should be brought back? Yes. Do I think they should be brought back from China? Yes. But do I think they should be brought back from everywhere else? Yes. So I'm as I mentioned before with one of your colleagues, Mr. Higgins and I were agreeing that we basically need to bring as much manufacturing back as we can Do I think that you can sit down and decouple the United States economy from the Chinese economy? No. I think that was a policy option years ago. I don't think it's a reasonable policy option at this point. So, but I think that you will see supply chains come back as a result of U.S. policy, including the kinds of things that you all did in the tax bill, but also with the regulatory space that the president has done, as well as the tariffs that we put in place. We shouldn't forget that Phase 1 agreement has substantial $370 billion worth of tariffs. That's a lot of tariffs on their products. So I think you will see some change in that respect. But I'm basically for manufacturing in the United States.
Thank you.
Thank the gentleman. Let me recognize